Hello, Phil here from Wings of Pegasus and welcome to another analysis video. If you enjoy this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe. On the agenda tonight, we're going back to 1979. We're going to be taking a look at Boston and they're going to be playing through More Than a Feeling. So let's get the guys up on screen and see how they get on.
This morning and the sun was gone. Turned on some music to start my day. Then lost myself in a familiar song. I closed my eyes and I slipped dream.
I'm just going to jump in here. The link to this is going to be in the description below so you guys can watch it the whole way through without me interrupting it. But what a classic track this is, More Than a Feeling. Probably one of the first songs I ever heard in terms of listening to the guitar playing and the way that Tom Scholz recorded his guitar, multi-tracked them in the studio in order to get the sound that he did on this record. And he's one of those guys that is probably just as interested in the technology side as the playing side and the production side. This is one of those tracks that, hearing the recording, it's just a piece of art, the way that it's been put together, and you can just sit back and appreciate the production value on it, the playing on it as well, the technical ability, but just the overall composition and the art that it is. So being able to reproduce this kind of track live, considering the sound on the record, would be such a challenge, especially for a standard band setup if you've only got a 4-piece or a 5-piece. And I love the way that we start the track with Brad Delp on keys, and then he transitions over to guitar as well, and the fact that he sings, of course. So you've got 3 jobs being taken care of one musician, and this is always the case with the top bands, is that they weren't only great musicians in terms of instrumentalists, but also singing as well. They could supply vocals and also backing vocals. This is one of those tracks that is absolutely imperative to have great backing vocals as well. And while I'm mentioning those backing harmonies, we've got Barry Goudreau on rhythm guitar supplying those harmonies as well as Tom in the background, and nailing those live again is so important for this track because those vocals have got to harmonize with each other and absolutely be spot on. And this is something that performing this track night after night must have been so tough. And I think Brad does get to a point here where he does flip up into his head voice during the verses to get those notes, and then struggles a little bit in the chorus. But I just say, hand the mic to anybody and get them to sing this like the record, because it is nigh on impossible, especially I'm sure that Brad, starting out at the beginning of the tour, would have been nailing it. But this track, because of those vocals, is so wearing on the voice, especially if you're doing it night after night after night. I would say to anybody brave enough or stupid enough to criticize Brad Delp and his vocals, I'd ask them to record them singing this track. Even with loads of vocal rest, just sing this track live because it is so difficult to nail. Even recorded, just record yourself singing this and mix it, post-edit it, and just keep the vocal a true vocal of your own because it's so difficult to sing this song. And I feel at this point I just want to give a quick shout out to a regular commenter on this channel, and check out his channel. It's called Truth Surge, because he does a great cover of More Than a Feeling vocally. He sings the vocal, puts them all together, harmonizes as well, because just getting to that point of nailing the vocals is so difficult. So check out that cover if you get a chance. But back to this track and the analysis, because Tom on guitar as well, his guitar technique and the way that he throws together the melody and the expression with the vibrato. This is one of the first lead solos that I worked out myself, and then got a bit of an understanding as to how difficult it is to vibrato with that expression like Tom does in this track. And we've got that classic Boston sound of harmonizing with those lead guitar lines. And listen to this track and the amount of lead guitar that we have, because this is one of those tracks that gets consistent radio airplay and crosses over onto mainstream radio airplay. But listen to the amount of solos that we've got in there. They are extended solos, but because of the fact they are melodic, and they're so musically put together with the harmony lines as well, it means that during those solos, at no point do you ever think, oh, this solo's dragging on a bit, let's get back into the vocals so that we get another melodic element that we can listen to. And that goes for the riff as well. Every element of this track, to me, is a masterpiece, because you've got great guitar riffs, you've got great guitar lead lines, you've got absolutely crazy vocals, harmony vocals as well, harmony lead lines. Everything for me is in this track. And you can see by the intro that Tom's got all of his effects absolutely sussed, and you'd expect nothing less from a guy who studied at Massachusetts Institute of Technology and got a master's degree there, and also set up his own company called Schultz Research and Development, where he made amps and effects. So he was just a technical whiz kid as well, being able to put together all of his own pedals, and really had so much input in the production and the sound and the effects and everything that he did in the studio, giving Boston their classic sound. And he really was a perfectionist as well. So once Tom got his degree, he then got a job at Polaroid, which allowed him to save up money in order to build his own home studio in the basement. But also he recorded at professional studios to get some demos together. And when he was in his basement studio, that's where he got Brad and the guys to get down demos, and they sent them off to lots of different record labels but kept on getting rejected. And at that time it was Jim Mazdia who was playing drums, because in this performance it's Sib Hashian, and Barry was also playing rhythm guitars on the demos, but Tom took control of all the other instruments, playing bass and guitars and keys as well. So he was really the creative force and the production force behind the demos and how they sounded. And it just so happened that Paul Ahern and Charlie McKenzie, who were two promoters at the time, got to hear a demo that these guys had stuck together, and they were suitably impressed. So they began managing the band, and they got them a record deal at Epic Records. But back in the day, what happened, in order to get the record deal, they had to do a live audition for the record company executives. And during this time, the amount of production that was on the original tracks was going to be really hard to replicate live. And at this point, Jim Mazdia had left the band, so that's when they got in Sib Hashian on drums, who we can see in this video. And we also had Frad Sheehan, who came in on bass as well for that audition, but the record label were impressed as well. And I think with hindsight, they would have renegotiated the contract with Epic Records, because they agreed to release 10 albums over the period of 6 years. And for someone like Tom, who is a perfectionist and won't really release anything until he's totally happy with it, that amount of albums over the period is just so much material would have had to have been written and perfected in the studio. So unfortunately they ran into trouble later with that, but that's the deal that they signed with Epic. So once they started working on the first Boston album, Tom wanted to do it all in his basement studio, whereas the record label said that they wanted them to go to a professional recording studio. So John Boylan and Tom, John was another producer at the time, they hatched a plan to send the rest of the band to the professional recording studio, so it looked like that was where they were recording, when in fact it was all being done in Tom's basement. And this was really important because it meant that Tom had the ability to work at his own pace and get the songs to sound exactly how he wanted them to. And of course, More Than a Feeling was a single from that album, and we all know how well that album did, going on to sell over 17 million copies, one of the biggest selling albums in the USA. But let's get back into this performance.
I see my Marianne walking away.
I'm just going to jump in here. Unfortunately, I'm not going to have time to watch this video the whole way through. Like I mentioned earlier, it's going to be in the description below if you want to watch it the whole way through. And I'm just going to mention Barry Goudreau again when he comes in to play these lead lines behind Tom, really backing up with those harmony lines. The lead guitar playing has got to be technically sound in order to sync these lines up, also to synchronize the vibrato and get the whole expression that you do get from the record. These guys are obviously so well rehearsed, and they do a great rendition of the solo on the record. The harmonizing is absolutely spot on, and just to say that Barry, a great lead player in his own right, and when you stick these two guys together, you get that classic Boston sound. And also, let's not leave Brad out of that equation, because his voice is synonymous with the sound, of course. And I don't want this video to go on for too long, but I just want to mention a few more things, because the album Boston stayed in the charts for 132 weeks, and it got to number 3. And in 1979, unfortunately, the manager, Paul Ahern, stopped them working on new material, stopped Tom working on new material, because he said that Tom had signed a contract that entitled him to some percentage to whatever Tom wrote from every song after that contract was signed, which I think is just massively dodgy, because a manager taking royalties for a song that their artist has written is just a really weird thing to be claiming in the first place. So at this point in 1979, Tom said to the rest of the band that it's probably a good time to go and work on your own solo material if you want to, because the band are going to be delayed whilst him and Paul sort out this issue. Just to reference a point I made earlier in the video about Tom being a perfectionist, because CBS filed a $60 million lawsuit against Tom for not producing the albums in the time frame that they wanted him to. And this is the classic case of a record label and an artist. The record label just want you to put out quality material as fast as possible so they can make the most money, whereas they don't realize that it is an art form and you can't just magically come up with great art, because if you could, then you'd be the most in-demand person in the world. But anyway, they sued him, and fortunately, Tom, in the end, won that case, but it delayed production on the album by 6 years. So the record label really shot itself in the foot, because they lost the case, and the album that they wanted just took so much longer because of their actions. But you'll also notice that the time between the second album and the third album being released was actually 8 years, and then between the third and the fourth album was another 8 years, and between the fourth and the fifth album was another 8 years, and then from the fifth to the sixth album was actually 11 years. And I know that the personnel within the band has changed over the years, as happens with a lot of big bands, but Tom is always the driving force behind Boston. And nowadays they are a 7-piece, so really able to bring that record sound to the live stage, because they've got multi-instrumentalists and vocalists. You'll really get a great rendition of Boston tracks live. But thank you so much for suggesting this video for me to take a look at, and keep those suggestions coming in the comments below. Let me know what you guys think, and if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe, and I'll see you guys at the next one.